the elevators, a journey on the southwestern quadrant of the square. It's 12 flights of stairs, so pray that we don't have a fire drill. Quick welcome and acknowledgement of country. So acknowledging that we are meeting on the lands of the Kaurna people and that we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. There's a short delay in my clicking. So I'd like to welcome you all to the Adelaide Microsoft IT Pro Community User Group Meetup for May 2025. I'm Andrew O. Young, a modern work specialist at Data, also Microsoft MVP in the security category. That's the QR code to my LinkedIn, but most of the show notes and all the recordings from our meetups will be published one way or another through my socials.
Yes, and I'm Shahan. I'm Microsoft MVP as well in Intune and Identity and Access, and I'm working as an architect in Bastion Technology Services, specializing in endpoints and identity. Over to you.
And let's just like to extend our thanks to the sponsors of Microsoft for providing the venue that we are meeting at, Systematec for sorting out our meetup, and well, I guess Data for allowing me to be here, but sometimes there's swag, and my own branding there, so the refreshments out there are.
So we just need to provide like a screenshot of evidence or something.
Yeah.
Beat me to it. Cool. Intention left blank. So what we normally do in these meetups, if you haven't been here before, we go through a quick what's new, what's coming, and so on, and then we'll introduce the guest speakers. Someone keep muting people. So what's new on-prem? So Exchange Server, Sky for Business Server, if you're still using that, the latest version is Subscription Edition, which is now generally available coming July. So you are paying recurring licensing fees instead of the once-off. And if you are using those products, there will be an increase in pricing as well as the client access licensing. So expect all these price changes coming July. Microsoft Entra, so the Azure AD and Microsoft Online PowerShell modules are now deprecated. So they suggest you use the new Microsoft Graph PowerShell. And if you are using Entra Connect Sync for your identities in hybrid, make sure that you upgrade to the latest version because there will be some inconsistencies and some things may break in the latest changes. I've also seen that the Entra Permissions Management, MEPM, is retiring. And Microsoft have now partnered with Delinea to provide an alternative solution, so privilege control for cloud entitlements, PCCE.
Yes, so this is something new in Microsoft Entra conditional access policy stuff. So they have recently introduced a advanced deployment guide for conditional access policy templates. So templates been there for a long time, but now it's easy for you to adopt this very quickly by looking at what are the standards and what are the key scenarios like zero trust, remote work, protecting privilege roles, and emerging threats. So according to those scenarios, there are policies that you can enable then and there. So in 3 modes, as always, on, report only, and off. And then when you configure them, that will be applied to the devices and users. So why this stuff coming up? It's easy. It's very easy to skip those and skip those policies and basically ignore those security sort of standards. So rather doing that, it's just in this way, the essential policies will be applied as soon as possible.
So Microsoft Purview, rather, the compliance and information protection. So we've got something new called Data Security Investigations, which is now in preview. And this essentially gives you that generative AI assistance in looking into risky insider incidents and other kind of information protection breaches. Alongside that, we've got something new in data lifecycle management. So if you have a mailbox that is licensed to have an online archive, you can now, from the PowerShell level set for the entire organization, any mailbox that reaches that 90% quota, it will automatically provision that archive mailbox, so you don't have to hit 90-something%, get those warnings that prevent you from receiving and sending emails. That will just happen by itself once you've set that with the Exchange Online PowerShell. For information protection, generally available, we've talked about dynamic watermarking before. That's where you have your user principal name shown in the watermark now. So if you've got a file open that's been labeled to be protected this way, if there's any leakage of that document, say if someone's taken a photo of it, it's going to have your username stretched across the file. And there's also inheritance between the Microsoft Teams meetings and the artifact. So it will suggest the label that should be applied or the sensitivity that should be applied to that meeting and so on. For Intune, so we're getting custom naming templates for the Android devices. So this will help with, I guess, consistency and being able to, in your reporting, you're able to see identify devices a lot easily. So that's now generally available. We're getting Apple Intelligence controls for unmanaged devices. So devices that aren't enrolled in Intune, you can now set some controls through application protection policies to then prevent leakage of corporate data through, say, Apple Intelligence or the app in which Apple Intelligence works out of. So extra controls around that. And there is some improvements to the volume purchase program API. So previously, if you say, for example, have 10,000 iPads that you need to give 25 apps to, it would run 25,000 API calls, which is not very effective or efficient at all. So the improvements in version 2, so that kind of exercise may only take up to about 10 API calls to achieve the same result. So sweeps and changes there. And we've got a new Intune icon. Right. Still trying to figure out what it signifies, but my initial guess is it's kind of like a wavelength, because it's in tune. But it could be an infinity symbol, could be whatever you can think of there. I'm sure the product group team can give us some idea of what they actually meant by that. But that's now rolling out to all the tenants as of the end of last month. So when you head to the Intune admin center, you'll start seeing that pop up.
Yes, so what's new in security? Again, Defender related, pretty much Intune, Entra, and everything related. So you got the Microsoft Security Reference Architectures that came up a long time ago. The previous release was December 2023. So they have done some enhancements and a new release just last month, I think. So a lot of Copilot AI ingestion into those presentations and the reference architectures, as well as Entra ID enhancements as well.
Oh, bro, this is useless, but I'm doing it anyways.
No one heard that. That's why I was people with mid meeting. Yeah, I didn't realize that it's been 2023 was the last one. I've seen the reference architecture, but I didn't realize it's versions. Cool. So if you're interested in some self-paced learning, Microsoft has got these tech community blog posts, which have a huge amount of links to them. So all the learning paths, all the Microsoft Learn documentation around these security products in the Defender suite, or stack rather. And each one has their own kind of assessment at the end through Microsoft Forms. So you get effectively a certificate of completion if you like that kind of thing. And if you go through all of that, you can start looking at cloud native app protection policies. There is a free ebook floating about in the wild regarding that. My favorite part, Microsoft Learn. We've talked about many times the Microsoft Information Security Administrator. So there's a new certificate that replaces the existing Information Protection and Compliance Administrator. So the SC401 is now replacing SC400. The exam is now available. Results came out for the beta. The course on Microsoft Learn is now available as well. And in case you missed it, on April the 8th, Microsoft took an official attempt and actually attained a Guinness World Record for having the most number of people taking a multi-level AI lesson in 24 hours. So they managed to hit, I believe it was 126,000 and X number of people taking part. And yeah, they got the got the award. So that's kicking off essentially their 50 years of existence. So they have 50 days of learning. So the AI Skills Fest, which is still going until the end of this month, I guess, May 28th is the last day. And there is an AI Skills Challenge at the same time. So if you enter that, there's a chance of you receiving a free exam voucher. Anything else you want to add to that? No. No, I think that was about it for the learn stuff. So now we have got at least one student in the room, and I'm kind of grateful that someone in the universities is spruiking our user groups. But the Microsoft Learn Student Ambassador Program is essentially the stepping stone to becoming a Microsoft MVP. So you register through the same kind of website, the mvp.microsoft.com. You join a Discord server, and there are some activities and tasks that you would attempt to do. And once you have shown that you've made some impact, small or large, to the community, they'll actually upgrade you to a beta student ambassador. You actually get some swag. You actually get quite a lot of swag. As new MVPs, we got just the award plaque, whereas these guys get like a suitcase full of socks and stickers and things. But yeah, and as you progress through that program, you become a gold student ambassador, and that pretty much is a foot in the door to that MVP program. You get mentorship through from MVPs, and you may get invited along to those events at the same time. So good kickstart to your career if you're currently studying. At the same time, there is a Microsoft Student Accelerator or Meetup rather, that is run by Michelle Sanford from Microsoft. I think it's been a while since it's been in Adelaide, but yeah, if you're interested in getting that happening here, please reach out. And just a quick whip around the Adelaide user groups. So we've got a few other user groups that take place roughly the same time, but different week here in the Microsoft office. Only difference is the Copilot one is on Wednesdays, which is the first Wednesday of each month, so tomorrow. But yeah, we're all on Meetup, so if you're using the app, you'll be able to find us. What's coming? I didn't really find much. I didn't really try too hard to look, but there's a few events happening in the States. We've just had so many. There was Microsoft Secure, RSA conference, and so on. But yeah, M365 Community Conference is on right now. Build is on a couple of weeks' time, and let's see, Identiverse is happening as well. So that's a new one for me. And for the user group, we've got some loose topics lined up. We'll publish the speakers and the official titles as the time comes. But if you are interested in requesting certain topics or presenting at the user group, please use the form. I'll have to put a 6 in front of that 5 shortly because we're getting close to the end of the year soon. That first half went very quickly. End of the year, we'll try and do another joint user group session post-Ignite. And in case you missed it, and we're going to keep harping on this, we have started a new podcast called Out of the Ban. It's a Microsoft security podcast. And yeah, it's run by me, myself, Shahan, and we've actually got Anthony Porter in the room. If you'd like to get up and yeah, surprise.
Yeah, look, happy to be in Adelaide. Just flew in, suitcase still in hand. Yeah, look, yeah, I don't often get the opportunity to see these guys in person, but obviously taking the opportunity where I can to come see the user group as well. So yeah, thank you for those who did come in person and those who are remote as well. It is much appreciated because you guys make these things happen. So appreciate it. Thank you. Yeah, I wasn't ready at all. What are you talking?
Yeah. So yeah, we're what, 7, 8 episodes in now, and yeah, we'll publish this out via the various channels, LinkedIn, YouTube, Spotify, and so on. But check us out for the QR code. There was going to be more, but other special guests couldn't make it. But I will hand it over to our formal guest speaker, Bob Bradley, and yeah, no worries. Over to you. I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Hi there. My name's Bob. I'm an Adelaide boy, although not so much a boy anymore. 57. grew up in Adelaide, worked for a couple of organisations here, joined a company called, you might have run into Jeff Rorsheim, I suspect. So he runs Chamonix and cloud. Well, he was involved in cloud as well. I worked for him for a little while. So anyway, I'm ad-libbing a bit here. I'll just give you a little bit of an introduction as to why I'm here. So I've been an identity management consultant, I guess, for the last 20 years. And in that time, identity has changed from being something that was a nice to have to being something that's kind of front and center with security. So this concept of identity management 20 years ago was a little bit vague, and it was more around workforce management and less about security, more about economies of scale. And so if we look at the timeline that I guess my working career in identity has covered, it's been a lot of change. And this is kind of a 20-year snapshot. So I want to actually take you through some of those things, and as I do it, I'd like to point out a couple of the things that you won't find on Google about, Microsoft identity and what it's like to deal with large workforce numbers. So my experience dates back to, or my professional experience, having left Adelaide University as a graduate, maths science, in 87. I worked in the bank for 5 years. I then cut a path with IT consulting through Aspect in Adelaide. Aspect became, I'm just trying to, Kaz, you probably ran into Kaz. I worked for Jeff Rorsheim for 3 years as a Microsoft consultant, mainly working in data warehousing and .NET development back in the early 90s, early 2000s. It would have been 2001 to 2004. And then jumped back into a company that I'd been working with some of the founders with over the previous 10 years, and that was Unify Solutions. And Unify is still going strong today. They're based in Queensland. They have they've grown from when I joined, I would have been their second full-time employee. They would have had a couple of hundred go through their books by now. Not an enormous company, but one that established itself in the identity space in Australia, and mainly around the Microsoft identity ecosystem. Then the last couple of years, I've joined an overseas company based out of Florida, and these days I'm still consulting, but mostly I'm building and training. And so the customers that we're working with at the moment are major global brands like Mars and McDonald's and Johnson Controls and that sort of thing. So that sort of customer base, it does create some challenges when you're dealing with upwards of 100,000 employees to upwards of 1 million resources that you need to manage the life cycle for. I'm still getting used to this thing. Okay, so some quick definitions. So identity management back in 2002, 2003, that sort of era, wasn't a mainstream thing. Workforce management was still not a concept. It was, they just realised a typical scenario was a student management admin had to onboard, a couple of thousand students at the beginning of the year and beginning of term, and someone has thrown him a DVD and it's got MIIS on it, and it purports to be able to do identity provisioning and synchronization. And most people who would have got that CD wouldn't have had any idea what that meant. But they would have been scripting in VB script or JavaScript or something like that. And they would have automated the creation of students. And all it was about is making sure that they have access to, at the beginning of the term, to do their course. There's less about everything else that has to happen. So these days we talk about a number of other ideas. I guess the oldest of them is JML, or Joiner Mover Lever, otherwise known as on or offboarding. Identity Governance Administration is another acronym that you'll see around the place, or IGA. There's a fair bit of business to business interaction that takes place now. And you see that every day in a Teams environment, certainly like this, where you need to have a business to business trust in place in order to allow collaboration across organisations. And the term SIAM, I think it's now outdated, isn't it? It's externals in the Microsoft world. So yeah, that's just a couple of things. So I'm just going to take you on a little bit of a journey quickly through the last 20 years. So when things started out for me, mail systems and automation was what it was all about, managing peak load periods. And Windows NT had been growing in parallel to the Windows desktop platform. And I think the emergence of Active Directory was a very significant thing. It meant that not only were devices connected to a network, but people and groups and everything else that we take for granted today in Entra. And yeah, as I said, script automation is the main means of being able to achieve anything at scale. So I was personally blissfully unaware of the concept of identity management, hadn't heard of IDM. I was single. I've been in the workforce about, 10 years. And I was playing cricket and Aussie rules footy, and work-life balance was a thing. Then the 2000s came along. So what happened after that? Windows 2003, 2008. This is the on-premises domination of enterprise computing. It had grown a leg since Windows NT. Active Directory is the core of it. Single sign-on through Kerberos authentication and this other thing called NTLM was common. And I guess the thing that I probably ought to mention at this point in time was security was not front and center. We weren't thinking security at this point so much. Yes, we were logging people on and you're authenticating, but beyond that, what you could access on the network wasn't so locked down. And there wasn't that much focus. It was all about how do we get people productive? And the main security concept was there's a server room over there that you can't get into. And you can't get into the server room if you can't get into the building. So you need a key card to get into the building. And so physical access to the network perimeter, and the internet was still emerging. Most organizations' networks were only really run internally. The idea of remoting in to do any work was kind of a novelty and something that only a few people did. At this point in time, there's this thing called MIIS 2003. So Microsoft bought a product called Zoom It and rewrote it. It was written originally in C++. It was rewritten in .NET and the SQL Server backend. And its first formative period of time was around here. And that's when I joined Unify, and I was thrown the DVD for MIIS 2003 and say, here you go, here's Service Pack 1. And my company was building, they discovered that there was an opportunity in networking around the Novell network space. And Novell had a very mature identity management platform, and Microsoft was offering this thing called MIIS, but it wasn't used in the same way as the Novell product had been used, which was what a concept of continuous compliance was what Novell was focused on. That is, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, continuous compliance is the idea that the only people that are actively using your network are the people that are currently entitled to be using that network. So it's constant, we call it reattestation now, but at any point in time, the only people that have got access are either your current workforce, so current full-time staff or current contractors. And the idea of an authoritative source was starting to be born. People were still very much using Active Directory users and computers to manage their user base. And obviously, the shortcomings of that, giving that to a service desk, are fairly obvious now. At this point, I've on a personal level, I got married and had kids, and so with this identity management industry, if you like, that I saw growing, it meant I could work remotely because a lot of the work that I needed to do didn't need to be behind a desk in an office, so long as the remote access that I was just talking about was good enough to get to an organisation. The most people that were tackling these sorts of problems were not organisations, funnily enough, other than universities or big government departments here. Most of the work that I was doing was in the eastern states. And so in Australia, it was necessary to travel a lot. Occasionally travelled to Perth. That was fun. Did a bit of work for WA Water. And yeah, at this stage, I started an association with a Catholic education group over in Sydney. So at this point in time, we're also demonstrating. So Unify is a small startup company. Microsoft here in Adelaide are interested in competing against the Novell space, and we were selling the idea of doing a enterprise solution for government departments around joiners, movers, leavers, around staff. And the HR system that government used here was Chris 21. I'm not sure if it still is. Is it still Chris 21? No idea. But that was mainstream. And we developed this, what we called a connector, or in MIM terms, these were called management agents. And the idea was that an authoritative source for an identity should be your HR system, because that's the most likely source of truth for accurate information like start date, end date, who's your manager, what department you're in, what cost centre do you belong to, all these sorts of things. And these are, funnily enough, things that turn up in Active Directory and then they find themselves up in the cloud. And you go, oh, this is all really good data. I can create a whole lot of dynamic groups or policy up here. And then you look at it a bit closer and you realise that it's not all that, the integrity is not what it could be, shall we say. And so that's really where my reason for being comes from. It's making sure that identity information that is used to drive security is always current and always accurate and always complete. And typically what that means is it's not all in one place either. So there's this art of synchronizing information, just enough information. I'm not going to have time for that. So just moving on to the next era, Microsoft Identity got rebadged many, many times. If you think about the on-prem version of it, which is what I'm talking about now, ILM 2007 was the next iteration. And this promised to do a few things. One of them is being password synchronization. Password synchronization was something that was considered a must-have back then because there was no federation per se. The best you could get was for single sign-on was same password, and in the world of Kerberos authentication, that means you shouldn't need to password sync anything because you're just authenticating to AD for everything, right? Wrong. There's so many enterprise applications did not authenticate to Active Directory, and so they maintain passwords in SQL databases, in different platforms, Unix platforms, and the ability to synchronize them was seen as a step up and something that was worth aspiring to. At this point in time, Active Directory is still front and center, but it's now starting to get a bit more complex. And so I guess the Achilles heel for the Microsoft Identity Suite that was FIM, MIM, ILM, was that it depended on .NET code to be able to implement custom business rules. And why I say Achilles heel is that identity isn't something that you want to have a very small number of people capable of looking after and developing. It's something that enterprises need to own and understand, and they need to be able to implement business rules that make sense to them, and they need to be able to locate those business rules when they need to change. Putting them in a DLL and putting them on a file share server somewhere is a great way of obfuscating business rules, and it makes it very hard later on to unpick. There was no out-of-the-box user interface for ILM 2007 at scale, apart from an admin console. SharePoint is emerging, but it hadn't actually become part of the mix. How am I going for time? Okay, 15, 50, good. Okay, enter FIM 2010. So FIM is the first time that there's this user interface, end user interface, shall we say. And lo and behold, it's a version of SharePoint, or it looks like SharePoint, and it is a SharePoint application. It was first run on Server 2005, Server 2005, SharePoint 2005, I think it was. At worst, 2003. And the password synchronization that came along previously was expanded to a self-service concept. So we could have self-service password resets, and the business value proposition that Microsoft was getting excited about, because let's face it, up until then, trying to sell the value proposition of a server process that runs on a back-end server that only a couple of people ever look at, it was really difficult to sell. And Microsoft account managers were suddenly enthusiastic about something that they could actually go out and sell that might make sense to an enterprise. This is probably still prior to the concept of a CEO or CIO. So this was the first flavour of codeless business rules. So we could write business rules in a configuration mode rather than having to write C#. But it was almost. There were still edge cases that you couldn't get away with that. What's more, with the advent of the SharePoint front end, if you wanted to write workflows, you had to write .NET workflows in SharePoint. And there was no drag and drop product on the market for that. So anyway, still complex. So the art of doing identity management was not only tricky, but it still wasn't mainstream. There was a big amount of excitement with this particular product because it was thought that this might drag identity management into the mainstream for Microsoft, but it didn't. And so after another few more years, we still ended up looking at a SharePoint application long after SharePoint on-prem was, I guess, yesterday's news. So what's happening here is there's this evolution of an identity platform, but it's being held back by the infrastructure and the understanding that existed at that period of time. At this point in time, I guess from a personal perspective, I was starting to do a lot of work with MCS. And that's because organizations were already going to Microsoft saying, I've got these problems that I need solved. What can you do? And people were being directed to our small company, Unify, because they'd heard of us and they'd seen some of these presentations that we'd done. We'd done some POCs and we started to do quite a lot of these implementations. And now, fast forward to now, there's hundreds of MIM implementations or FIM 2010 implementations around Australia and New Zealand. And they all need to be, I guess, rewired or replicate or replaced with something more modern by the end of 2029 when FIM/MIM reaches end of support. So we've got a technology platform that has a lot of moving parts. We've got not a lot of people that are using the platform or know a lot about it. It's still not mainstream, but there's still plenty of work. And for the last 20 years, I have to say, it's not been hard to find work in this area. There's more than you can actually handle. Once the momentum started to kick in around the early 2010s, and people started to understand what they could achieve, projects started becoming must-haves, not nice-to-haves. So now we're starting to move into the cloud era, Azure AD and Office 365, which wasn't called that at that stage. And the concept of hybrid identity came about. This thing called AAD Connect that we know about now, or it's not called that, it's Entra Connect, started off as this flavor or this appliance version of the MWIS 2003 sync service called DirSync. And that was responsible for taking whatever your Active Directory looked like today and replicating it to Azure AD. And so people that have been doing identity management, like myself, looked at that idea and thought, well, that's a bit scary if you don't know what's in your AD. What are we going to end up with? And yet it was happening at pace. So even small, medium businesses up to large enterprises were doing this very rapidly. And so we have the means of actually replicating stale account data, stale group information, a whole lot of stuff that shouldn't have ever wound up in the cloud, got there in the early days. And so part of the challenges that were faced around what do we do, because it's the first time people have realised how dirty their Active Directory is when they see it, warts and all, in Azure AD. So there was a lot of impetus, but the impetus was focused around the cloud and not so much around the on-prem. And so if you wanted to fix anything, we're going to have conditional access in Entra, now Entra. But still all of the wiring and the plumbing's done on-prem. And so there's the left hand and the right hand not being completely in sync. So that's where my passion for identity management really took hold. It was recognizing these problems that were emerging in the cloud space and realizing that something needed to be done, and that we needed to educate and direct organizations that were looking to do these sorts of things and share the pitfalls and architect solutions around mitigating the risks that we were seeing emerge. But a lot of the time, we were still being brought in to solve problems that are fundamentally, I mean, an example of that DirSync one is back in the early 2010s, DirSync would only synchronize a single forest to a single tenant. If you wanted to do anything more complex than that, you had to use FIM 2010. And that meant you had to go find a FIM consultant. And that was where I came in. There weren't too many of us. So this lot were the people that I met in 2014 in Seattle. And this was the first, if you like, clan gathering of the identity specialists in Australia and all around the world. There's 2 Australians in that group, a French guy, and a couple of them are still very active. The guy on the bottom left wrote a PowerShell connector that anyone who's used MIM or FIM would have run into that. That's Soren Gramfell, bottom left. So he was a bit of a guru. But you can look at the ages of them too, right? And we're all the wrong side of 50 now. So that's the challenge, is we've kind of grown up with this identity maturity or evolution, and it's now got to the stage where identity is mainstream, but some of the problems that have always been there are still there. So we're still trying to weed them out and resolve them. 2015 onwards, Azure AD is starting to mature. The concept of zero trust comes up. The idea of this thing called identity protection as opposed to perimeter protection. And also the emergence of some third-party brands and tools. Okta first surfaced, I think, around then. We had Amada and a few others. So effectively there was Microsoft were on a trajectory for architecting a hybrid workspace. And I should point out that I haven't had any real exposure to sort of externals, as in what they used to call CIAM, or citizen identity management, or consumer identity management. This is all enterprise. So this is all about managing your enterprise workforce, but trying to do it and make it a pattern-based management model. So at this time, IBM loses a contract to Microsoft for Queensland Education to implement what became the biggest ILM 2007 implementation in the Southern Hemisphere for Queensland Education staff and students. And that started a period of time where I was commuting every week to Brisbane for 4 months, which wasn't fun. But it was interesting because at that stage, there were a lot of people that were it felt somewhat ironic that IBM, who had their own mature identity management platform, were being trained in how to build a Microsoft solution using Microsoft products and Microsoft partners. So it was an odd time. Okay. So this is the emergence of MIM. So MIM is just another and the final rebranding of our identity management sync service, which is now hosted in a Windows Server 2008, or still 2008, I think, early on. Became 2015, 2016. The concepts of HR and app provisioning were emerging in Azure. I say Azure because it was Azure then. And the idea of onboarding workforce from an HR platform like SAP SuccessFactors or Workday was starting to gain some strength. But this is still 2016. And if you look up there now, the number of HR provisioning options is still Workforce and SAP SuccessFactors. There's a generic concept now, but there's still a fair bit of heavy lifting to do to get that integrated. But nonetheless, the first alternative to MIM starts to appear now. There's still plenty of learning curve to deal with at this point. Rapidly emerging was the catalog of applications that did single sign-on through SAML, and also what they call application provisioning through the Enterprise Apps console. So you could automate the creation. That's what that diagram is on the bottom there, on the bottom right. Your cloud HR system, the arrow points to Azure AD because that's the way that it should go, right? Not yet, still doesn't. You have to go, the only time you can go straight to Azure AD is if you've got no on-prem AD at all. We are switching the polarity of that sync model round, so it's going to be closer to that diagram, but it's still not there yet. And so that means that most of the time, in order to synchronize and manage your joiners, movers, leavers, you've still got to start with your HR system, driving what goes into your AD, getting some system that is authoritative for consultants and third parties and having that go into your AD, and then having left hand not knowing what the right hand's doing. Azure AD Connect pushes everything up from AD, assuming, of course, everything is perfect in your AD. And then once it gets up into Azure AD, you can then use this app provisioning through something called SCIM. SCIM was this cross-domain identity management model or protocol that emerged. And it had a good deal of success because I could take applications like cloud applications like Salesforce or Box or any number of non-Microsoft cloud hosted apps that understood SCIM, and you could automate the creation of new user accounts and assignment of default role membership. But that was about it. So if you want to do anything more complex, you still had to go back to MIM. And there was a couple of things that you couldn't do unless you had MIM. One of them was password sync, funnily enough. So the answer now is you shouldn't be looking at password sync because you should be federating. You should be, but there's only so much IT budget and there's only so many thousands of legacy applications running around the world. So there's still a very large footprint of identity on-prem that's still linked to these legacy style of identity management models. And I say that now because, you know, I'm 20 years into this experience and everyone else is calling it legacy. So it's catching on. You know, I'm still starting to go, well, yeah, it's legacy. And it is legacy because there's limits to what you can do on-prem. in some ways. But now there's limits to what you can do at scale in the cloud. And one of those limits is state-based provisioning that MIM was really good at. MIM was good at saying, I've got 3,500 HR active employees in the HR system. I've got 3,500 accounts in AD and Azure AD. And if there's a change, I have to synchronize the delta, and the delta's replicated out. The model in Entra now is not that. It's approximating that or progressing towards that, but it's still a workflow model. So you do the initial provisioning, and then thereafter it's a transactional approach. So I still think there's some value in the actual MIM mindset and the MIM model, but MIM's struggle was that it was limited to a SQL database, SQL Server database backend, and a very, very chatty application. So trying to get it to handle 1 million identities and students like we did in Queensland education meant that we had to build 3 of these MIM servers and run them in parallel. They couldn't scale, you couldn't do any load balancing, so you had to split the functions out. So none of those problems exist in the Entra space, but we got different problems in the Entra space. COVID-19 then came along. What that did was that really reinforced the idea that you've got a workforce that must be mobile, but they also must be secure. So no longer is identity management just all about mobilizing the workforce and making people productive quickly. It's making sure that they do so securely, because you can't hide them behind a key fob. You can't say, okay, well, the only people that access my network are the people that are coming through my turnstiles at the front door. So that happened all very, very quickly. The evolution of those YubiKeys and that sort of thing, and the challenges around YubiKey technology that came along with them as well. I worked with a particular government department who implemented a YubiKey mechanism where they had a single PC that did all the certificates off it, and in order to, you get basically 3 strikes and you're out with a YubiKey. And if your YubiKey dies, the certificate gets invalidated. It was a physical journey back to the head office. And work for the same department. And man, that was just, I reckon in a period of 2 weeks, I went back 3 times because, it was disastrous. So not fun. But these are all new problems that have emerged through the need to get people functional. And I guess the thing that I'd like you to remember most about this experience of mine is that the focus is always on getting people active, getting people functional, getting people productive. It's very much less about locking the doors and cleaning things up when they move on, or adjusting for when they've changed their roles. And a really good thing to think about is there's this button on the Active Directory users and computers console where you click on a user and you right mouse click and click and say, copy user, same as this person. And you can really quickly create another user profile in your AD, just like somebody else. But it just happens that the guy that you're just cloning it off has been with the organization for 15 years and occupied so many roles that he's got group membership way out of control. And the other thing that used to occur a fair bit was, I don't know what you call it, but token bloat. So you'd hit the limit of the number of group memberships that you could handle in the Kerberos token, and suddenly you can't authenticate single sign-on at all. I digress. So it's no longer about securing the perimeter. You've got a mobile workforce, it's decentralized, and they're all needing to be not only working remotely, but onboarding and offboarding remotely. So some people in your workforce now have never been into your head office at all. They're only ever had an experience remotely. And so the technologies need to be able to support that. And see why it's obviously going cloud first as a result. So what does a modern identity toolset look like? Well, it used to be VB script and JavaScript and XML and emergence of .NET. Now it's all the graph API with PowerShell mostly. There's obviously skim provisioning is something that I've mentioned earlier. That is gaining traction. Significantly so. There's about 500 apps today that I can think of that are currently skim enabled. On the Microsoft MIM front, PowerShell was emerging as the only way to do anything, and MIM was kind of left behind until one of the Australian MVPs in the MIM space, his name's Ryan Newington from Monash University, wrote a PowerShell module for MIM, 2 of them, or about 10 of them. And suddenly it breathed new life into the old MIM platform, and people could start doing what they always thought they should have been able to do with the product a long time ago. But it was kind of a bit too late. So now what we have is we've got lots of technology, lots of interconnected systems. This little diagram here on the left-hand side is just a smidge of what you might expect in any enterprise. That's just talking about the graph integration. If you want to look at the identity integration that spans the hybrid space, things become very messy. So then the Entra rebrand happened. And I'm probably going over time at this point. It's okay? Okay. So Entra rebranding happened. And at this stage, I've just left my company for 18 years in Unify, and I've joined a company called Software IDM in the US. And I'm in Berlin and hosting a couple of the MIM people that you saw in that photo earlier. And I'm presenting an alternative platform for MIM hosted in Azure, but with a lot of the principles and approaches that we're all familiar with still ingrained in the process. So the Entra rebranding comes up, and the main things that stood out for me at that particular point in time was what I was looking for in that diagram there. The generic one. So there's a little SQL thing on the left. It's generic SQL, Azure SQL. So that really means doesn't matter what your HR system is, your source of truth, we can handle it in the Entra space. The question is, how do you get it into there in the first place? But the other things that are really important to understand at this point in time is that by now there's a lot of familiarity in the market about, everyone knows what identity is, right? So you've got phone multi-factor authentication on your phone, you've got YubiKeys, you've got complex passwords and password rotation, you've got the Azure security consoles for managing conditional access and all the things that go into managing an enterprise identity space. But I think what really I keep coming back to all the time, is that it's only as good as the information that goes in there in the first place. And so the art of identity management isn't just making everything available to be managed and changed, but it's coordinating it and allowing it to be coordinated at scale and designing business rules at scale. So I'm now dealing with very large workforces, and those large workforces have been managed up until now by MIM. And we're looking at the Entra space and we can see little gaps still. And they're annoying gaps because they're things like password sync. Still got legacy password sync going on. can't do that in the intra space yet, and we never will. It will never be done in intra. So the argument is that stop doing password sync, get rid of your legacy app. The other thing that's going to change is the polarity of the synchronization in a hybrid world. It'll become intra first, and intra provisioning on-prem of AD will be a thing for those that still have to have an AD. And there will be lots of places that still need AD. So yeah, that's the era we're in now. Where we're heading. So there's been a really strong take up of passwordless authentication for good reason. We're talking about one of those scenarios with a password reset just a little earlier, where self-service password reset can be a really nasty way of losing or having a bad actor gain access to your network if it's not locked down and carefully done. So passwordless is a lot more secure if you can implement it. I think the general understanding is that a physical multi-factor key is much better than a soft token. We're still seeing a lot of buzz around decentralized ID, but that still hasn't gained traction in the enterprise workspace yet. And I'm not sure how it will at this point. I'm maybe too long in the tooth for that. There is definitely some emergence of AI threat detection, and I think the other thing that'll be really important is if you're thinking of all the myriads of intra consoles that need to be managed, a way of coordinating and managing all the settings in your enterprise configuration and anticipating what you're needing to do and looking after that. But that's just with a focus on the cloud first side of things. I believe we're still going to have a long period of time, and we talk about a tail of a meteorite or a comet. MIM is going to have a very long tail. 2029 will come and go, and it won't see the end of the MIM footprint globally. MIM will still be very much chugging along. What happens to it after that, who looks after it after that, I'm not sure, but it's certainly a race to see how we can uplift all of the MIM implementations out in the world and provide a path forward. So my company is very much focused on that. Microsoft's very much focused on it with the Entra suite. And as I always have, I'm very much focused on filling the gaps. So yeah, that's pretty much it. This is the timeline recap. So we went from 2002 when it was Windows Server 2003 to now, which is Entra ID, both above and below that line. You see the above the line is the operating platform and below the line is the identity platform. They've kind of merged into one. So to summarize, we are securing identity because there's nothing else to secure. We're going cloud native by default. Identity engineers like myself need to be proficient in hybrid and cloud skill set, but we also need a smattering of legacy skills. PSQL still comes up quite a lot. And this world of legacy, it's not going away really quickly. So people are dealing with it. And a person that I always remember, he said, Bob, if you ever want to find where the work is, go where the pain is. Go find the pain. That'll be where there's things to do. So, and that'll be the case until we get on top of this on-prem footprint. And it's not just identity; it's all sorts of things. There's going to be an ongoing need to manage a hybrid workspace. So yeah, I'm not sure how the questions are going to work off the forum, Andrew. But yeah, if there's any questions, maybe feel free to shoot me an email or ping me. Okay, let's do that. How do I do that? So yeah, if anyone wants to chime in, by all means. All right. Well, thanks for your time and attention, and I hope to have been able to provide you with a little bit of a different insight as to what identity might mean in 2025. Because as I say, you know, people just expect it's been like it is now for a long time, and it hasn't. It's evolved very quickly, especially since COVID. So things are still being bedded down. All right.
Thanks, Bob. Bit of a trip down memory lane for some of us. I believe you started your little trip there in identity just while I was still in uni. So good times. I think I did some slide shuffling. This should work. It did work. All right. So I'm gonna get my other special guest to come up here today, and we'll wrap up after that. But coming to the stage now, Matthew Clark.
Right on. Does it work? Push button.
Yes.
On the right. Cool. Oh, we're up there. Hello. I'm Matt Clark. As you can see on here, I've got a book there. You can sign up at my website, secureinseconds.com. It's targeted at sort of your layperson, less technical people. 5-minute fixes most of those problems, stops creepy ads and blockers, and keep your kids safe online. Very important to me. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm a security professional, have been for, you know, at least 10, 15 years now. So that's very important to me, for sure. The other one is this one here. This was a sort of a side thing that popped up. As I was writing Secure in Seconds, I started writing this app to anonymize my email. Anyone who has a domain has the ability to forward any domain email address to themselves as sort of as a mask. I'm putting the fact that I have a domain out there to everybody else so that they can make their own email addresses and forward it to their single inbox. You can then also turn it off. So, you know, if you don't want to receive email from a domain anymore, so if you sign up to Amazon and they're sending you too much stuff, you can then toggle that off, delete it, never receive email from them again. So that's what this service is there. Welcome you to come and have a look at that. And then finally is the QR code. If you come here or go to that website down the bottom there, you can get my book for free, and I will send a weekly email to you on Thursdays that has a brief security tip on there for you. So yeah, thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you. So stay tuned. We'll have the recording and the show notes posted up on the usual LinkedIn, the website, and the email. Again, I'd like to thank you for coming, and we should see you next month. We will have Sky Davis coming along for DevSecOps, so a bit of DevOps and security, continuing the theme in security there. So yeah, as I said before, if you've got any topics you want to hear about or you want to present, reach out to us, but we'll happy to cater to your needs there. So as you will. Thanks for coming in person and thanks for attending online. If there's anything left outside, feel free to grab some. I've got some stickers or something if you'd like. But that's all for now.